My name is Jeff Cunningham. I am the Marketing Communications Manager for the American Galvanizers Association. And we have American Galvanizers Association and the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance have partnered to host a four-part webinar series focused for bridge owners, designers, faculty, and students to provide educational information on short span steel bridges. It's all titled Building Better Bridges in 2025. Now, each webinar will feature an industry expert presenting a topic essential to cost-effective design and installation of steel bridges. The AGA and the Triple SBA have committed to helping engineers and owners build more resilient, long-lasting infrastructure. And first up in our series is Dr. Michael Barker. He is going to be presenting on steel versus concrete, life cycle performances and costs. Dr. Michael Barker received his bachelor's and master's in civil engineering from Purdue University and his PhD from the University of Minnesota. He is a professor of civil and architectural engineering at University of Wyoming, and Dr. Barker is the Director of Education for Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. I guess you've already introduced me, so I don't have to introduce myself. But what you see on the slides are the four planned webinars for the Building Better Bridges in 2025, where the American Galvanizers Association and the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance have teamed together and said, hey, let's help our industry a little bit by giving some education out there. And so we certainly thank the AGA for allowing us to use their platform. And we thank all of you. Like Jeff said, there's over 700 people signed up. That is wonderful for the middle of the day on a Wednesday. So we thank you for joining us. And like Jeff said, today we're going to talk about steel versus concrete, life cycle performance and costs. As part of that, Building Better Bridges in 2025, I'm Michael Barker at Wyoming and also the Director of Education for the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance, which I do want to introduce to you. The Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance is an industry support alliance that is a group of bridge and buried soil structure industry leaders who have joined together to provide educational information on the design and construction of short span steel bridges. The Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance was initiated in 2007 as part of the American Iron and Steel Institute, where the members are stakeholders in the steel bridge industry. And the purpose of the alliance is to help owners and design engineers with designing and building simple span steel bridges. This is a list of what we do. The alliance is involved with all aspects of simple span steel bridge design and construction, including outreach and education. And of course, an example of that is this collaboration with the AGA with the four presentations in the Building Better Bridges in 2025 series. Resources on all aspects of steel bridges, sample case studies, a simple design tool called eSpan 140, which allows the user to get a design for a steel bridge in a matter of just minutes. And of course, a technology center for questions. And then we are also into innovative and accelerated bridge construction solutions and manufacturing firms that can deliver you a bridge. And the website is there, and we certainly encourage you to visit that to see all that we offer on that website. So for today's presentation, we're going to look at economy and life cycle costs of steel and concrete bridges. We're going to start with the initial costs and move into life cycle costs. And this is an AGA presentation, and so we're going to talk about life cycle costs of galvanized bridges right at the end. We start with the preconception that concrete bridges are less expensive than steel bridges in the short span market. Many owners and engineers believe this to be true, and many times steel is not even considered when there is a short span bridge need. And of course, this is unfortunate because that means owners may be paying more for their bridges than is necessary. If owners and engineers would compete steel and concrete bridges, the cost for both would be lower due to the competition. In fact, studies show that states or regions that do not even consider steel alternatives and only build concrete bridges pay more for those concrete bridges than states or regions that have a healthy competition between the two bridge materials. And now we're going to look at case studies of county and state bridges for initial costs. The first case study is kind of special to me because it's kind of where the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance started. It's from Audrain County, Missouri, and these are bridges that were built in 2012. These two bridges were built by an Audrain County work crew, so there is no contractor for the bridges. This is a special case study in that the Alliance worked with the county engineer from before construction through the opening of the bridge to track all costs. The steel bridge consists of 4 steel girders and a 47.5-foot span, a 24-foot roadway width, and a 2-foot structural depth. The concrete bridge consists of 6 precast hollow core slabs with a little longer 50.5-foot span, but still a 24-foot roadway width and a 2-foot structural depth. These two bridges were built in the same year and are nearly identical except for the small difference in the span length. So the engineer was asked to keep a detailed account of all the costs for the construction of the two bridges so that a direct comparison could be evaluated. This slide shows the total cost for the two bridges, where the costs are broken into material and labor, equipment, bridge rail, rock, and engineering. And we can see that for the total costs of these two bridges, the steel bridge has a 19% savings over the concrete bridge. The costs are calculated based on the square footage right at the bottom because of the slightly longer 3-foot length of the concrete bridge. However, comparing only total costs can be deceiving given that the different site characteristics of the two bridges. For instance, we see here that the concrete bridge had significantly higher engineering costs and lower rock costs. So that same county engineer was also asked to separate out only the superstructure costs so that an equivalent direct comparison could be made for the two bridges. These costs represent the costs associated with only the superstructure. So this is a true apples to apples comparison of the cost of these two of this concrete and this steel bridge. Removed from the total cost is all site prep work and grading, engineering, rock, abutments, and so forth. And we can see the cost for the materials, labor, and equipment for only the superstructure. So if we look at the results, the steel bridge cost $37.54 per square foot and the concrete bridge was $50.61. The steel bridge is considerably less expensive for this comparison. Now, one item to note is the equipment cost, where the steel bridge used a county-owned 30-ton crane. The concrete bridge girder members are heavy, and the county had to rent a 100-ton crane at a cost of $3,500. The other $500 for each in the equipment was a rented skid steer for incidental work. However, even if the county needed to rent the 30-ton crane, that would have cost $1,520 at that time. That increases the steel bridge cost to only $38.88, still considerably less than the concrete bridge cost. The steel girders are weathering steel that requires no painting, and these costs are already in the cost of the steel girders. However, if the county needed additional corrosion protection and used, for instance, galvanizing, the cost would have been approximately $22 22 cents per pound of steel, and the steel bridge total cost would still be significantly less than the concrete bridge costs. So for these two bridges, as they were built, the superstructure only costs show that the steel bridge option would have a savings of over 25% compared to the concrete bridge. That is 5 steel bridges for the cost of 4 concrete bridges. This is for 2 almost identical bridges where they have the same structural depth, which means no difference in approaches, the same roadway width, the same bridge rail system, the same abutments, and the same county crew built both bridges. Now, this demonstrates that steel is competitive with concrete. In fact, for here is economical. And the preconception that concrete is always less expensive is incorrect. Steel short-span bridges can and many times will be less expensive than a concrete option. But everybody says, okay, that was one example. Yes, that's true. The Alliance also worked with the county engineer on other bridges built near the same time frame. And this table looks at the total constructed costs of an additional 5 steel and 4 concrete bridges built in Audrain County. At the bottom of the table, we see that sometimes steel is less expensive and sometimes concrete is less expensive. This is healthy competitiveness and is good for the owner and the public. These are examples of county bridges that show that both steel and concrete are competitive in the short span market. and both should be considered. Now, these examples were county-owned bridges. Next, we're going to look at a couple state bridges in Missouri. Here are two nearly identical bridges, one steel and one concrete, that cross over the same highway near Columbia, Missouri. Both are two-span with the concrete bridge just a little longer and wider, so of course the total cost will be divided by the deck area for comparison. These were both design bid build projects with a contractor constructing the bridges. Here are the costs for the two bridges. Concrete on the left, steel on the right. Both had non-bridge items such as a conduit system and pedestrian fence and an architectural facade, and these costs in the green were removed from the total cost since they are not structural. And at the bottom, we see the concrete bridge cost $77.71 per square foot, and the steel bridge cost $72.94. However, there was a 5-year difference in these two bridges when these two bridges were built. To account for the age difference and, of course, inflation, an Engineering News Record construction cost index of 2.7% per year was used to bring the cost of both of the bridges up to a common year of 2017. And we see here that the steel bridge was less cost at $85.58 than the concrete bridge at $91.18. The Alliance has so many more case studies on initial cost that you can find on the website, where the Alliance has looked at county and state bridges, bids and actual costs, case studies of county bridges. After the study was done, offered this quote in the report: "These conclusions come as a surprise to the authors, who assumed that concrete bridges would be more cost competitive than steel bridges." And so what these studies show, and the NSBA study shows, is that preconception, which is pretty prevalent across certain regions of our nation, is a misconception, that steel and concrete bridges are competitive. But first cost is just that, the cost of putting the bridge in place. Responsible owners are also concerned about future maintenance costs and service life. The question about life cycle costs routinely comes up. Well, what's actually asked is which type of bridge is best for life cycle costs? And both the steel industry and the concrete industries have offered anecdotal evidence, but has not until now, that's why I crossed off that does and put in a did, until now had good evidence on which bridge type is best. So a study was conducted that examines the historical life service, meaning performance and maintenance, and agency life cycle costs, meaning the true cost for building and maintaining the bridge over its life, of steel and concrete bridges in Pennsylvania. A historical study was conducted so that the results show what actually happened to the bridges instead of anecdotal guesswork from the steel and concrete industries. The Pennsylvania DOT had good records on their bridges and offered PennDOT data for the study, and we thank them. So to determine a life cycle cost for a bridge, one needs to know the full history of that bridge. This includes the initial cost and the year it was built and all maintenance that occurred over the life, including department and contractor maintenance, and the lifespan for the bridge or when it will be replaced. Of course, all the bridges in the PennDOT database were still in service, so an end-of-life model was needed to estimate the life of the bridge. The study's objective was to compare life cycle costs of typical concrete and steel bridges, so there were criteria that each bridge had to meet to be included in the study. The criteria included considering only typical steel and concrete bridges, where that was selected as precast I-beam, precast box where the boxes were adjacent to each other, precast boxes where the boxes were spaced apart, steel rolled beam, and steel plate girder bridges. In addition, both precast concrete became a mainstream construction method, and modern steel design and detailing started in about 1960, so bridges built after 1960 were considered. Each bridge that was used in the database had to have complete records for initial costs and date built, and accurate dates and costs for any type of department or contractor maintenance. Since the study was looking for typical bridges, it removed any bridges that had exceedingly high or low initial costs, and all costs were based on the PennDOT recorded costs. So PennDOT has over 25,000 bridges in their database. Of those, almost 8,500 are of the 5 types considered in the study. And of those 8,500, over 6,500 were built between 1960 and 2010 for a potential study database. When the 6587 bridges were subject to the criteria, many of them did not have accurate and complete life history information, which left a database of a little over 1,700 for the life cycle cost study. This is over 25% of the potential bridges represented in the life cycle cost study, which is pretty good representation. All of the 1,700 bridges are still in service, so a bridge life model needed to be developed to predict when the bridge would be taken out of service or replaced. The model is based on the inspection superstructure condition rating, which varies between 0 and 9, where 9, of course, is a perfect bridge. It was assumed that the bridge had a rating of 9 when it was built. A deterioration rate was determined based on the condition rating in the year of 2014 by the change in rating divided by the years. With the deterioration rate, the remaining life could be estimated by assuming the bridge would be replaced when the superstructure condition rating became a 3. And the bridge life is the sum of the remaining life added to the current age. So this table here is the first results from the life cycle cost study. It shows the average deterioration rates for the 5 types of bridges, not only for the 1,700 bridges, but for the over 8,500 potential bridges. For this presentation, when these results tables are shown, there will be 2 aspects of the results mentioned. First, the top 2 best performance types of the bridges will be highlighted. For instance, here, steel rolled beams bridges have the lowest deterioration rate of 7.1% of a condition rating per year, and precast spread box bridges is second with an 8% deterioration rate. The second aspect is the statement at the bottom in green that all are similar with none way out of balance. The results show that the deterioration rates for the 5 types of bridges are not far off from each other. There is no one type of bridge that greatly outperforms the other, nor is there a type that is significantly less than the others. And we're going to address this statement, all are similar with none way out of balance, towards the end of this presentation. So now let's do an example. We'll look at the life cycle analysis of an example bridge to demonstrate the work of the study. The bridge is a precast spread box bridge built in 1969 with 3 spans and a deck area of about 7,600 square feet. In 2014, the base year of the study, the superstructure condition rating was a 5. Knowing that the average deterioration rate for spread box bridges is 8%, the estimated remaining life when the condition rating reaches a 3 is 25 years. Given the bridge is 45 years old now, the predicted lifespan for the bridge is 70 years. Now the cost. The top of this slide shows the actual years and actual costs for the initial construction and the maintenance over the lifespan. The actual costs are divided by the deck area for comparison to other bridges. To compare life cycle costs over the database, inflation has to be taken into consideration. So all of the bridges were assumed to be built in 2014, and all of the costs inflated by the engineering news record construction cost indices, like we saw from that earlier case study. So for this bridge in 2014 dollars, it costs $143.45 per square foot. And the maintenance costs in 2014 dollars occurred at years 19, 40, and 44. The study used constant 2014 dollars for all future costs, since the discount rate that we're going to use considers inflation for the future. Now the life cycle of that bridge can be developed with dates and costs in constant 2014 dollars. Using a discount rate from the Federal Office of Management and Budget of 2.3%, that takes into consider inflation of the future 2014 dollar costs. A present value cost of the bridge's life cycle can be determined to be $154.49 per square foot by discounting those future costs back to the year 2014. This means that, more or less, if $154.49 was put per square foot was put away when the bridge was built, That amount could pay the initial costs and all future costs for that bridge cycle. However, we cannot compare the present value costs of a bridge that lasts 70 years to a bridge that lasts only 40 years. The outcomes are not equal. So a way to compare different lifespan bridges is to use perpetual present value costs, also called capitalized costs, by assuming the bridge is replaced after each cycle in perpetuity. For this bridge, the capitalized costs come out to be $193.97 per square foot, which means, again, that if that amount was put away today, it could pay for the first cycle of the bridge and replacement of that bridge every 70 years forever. But the important thing is, with capitalized costs, we can now compare all of the bridges in the database directly. So yeah, this is busy and small, but a bridge database was organized by bridge type in 3 Excel worksheets for each type. The first worksheet was the bridge information with location, year built, number of spans, bridge length, deck area, geometry, and bridge materials. The second was the department and external contractor maintenance performed on the bridge. And the third was the initial and life cycle cost results. Studies and a final report were produced from the database of bridges. The report considered bridge life and capitalized costs, where the capitalized costs were studied for several variables as shown here. Now for this lecture or this presentation, we're only going to look at bridge life, capitalized costs for the entire database, and capitalized costs for short length bridges as shown in blue. But the full detailed report can be found at shortspansteelbridges.org. And right after this study was completed, there was another study that looked at life cycle costs of galvanized bridges. And that report can also be found on the website, and I will talk about that towards the end of this presentation. For bridge life, the database of the 5 types of bridges show that the rolled beam bridges have the longest predicted life of over 81 years, and second was the precast spread box bridges at just under 80 years. However, as you see, none of the bridge systems varied much from the others, with a 7-year spread, and at the bottom is the statement that all are similar with none way out of balance. A good way to look at predicted life that considers not only the average life, but also the standard deviation of the life is a statistical cumulative density function, or CDF. Now here it is assumed that the data is normally distributed, and that may or may not be true. But with the CDF, the question can be asked, what is the probability that a given type of bridge will last at least 75 years, which is the expectation for modern bridge construction? The results here show that there is a 73% chance that a rolled beam bridge will last at least 75 years, and a 65.6% chance that a precast spread box bridge will. However, this also shows, according to the data from this PennDOT database, there's only a 44.3% chance that a precast I-beam bridge will last 75 years or more. A result that I really didn't expect. Okay, now let's talk about those capitalized costs. This table shows the results for capitalized costs for all the bridges in the database. Here we see that the precast I-beam bridge has the lowest capitalized costs, and the steel rolled beam is second. The table also shows the initial costs, present value costs of future maintenance, average length, average number of spans, average year built, and average life. And this is where we need to be careful with comparisons. Directly comparing all of the bridges without considering the differences in these variables can lead to misleading results. For instance, plate girder bridges in the database have an average of over 4 spans per bridge, whereas adjacent box precast bridges average just over 1 span per bridge. Number of spans, along with average length of the bridge, has a significant impact on costs. And in a couple slides, we will examine a more consistent set of bridges based on span length for a more consistent comparison. And of course, the full report examines these different variables in depth. However, for the full database results, we can again use that cumulative density function and again to ask a question. What is the probability that a bridge type has a capitalized cost less than $300 per square foot? And the results show here that there's a 93% chance that a precast I-beam and an 88% chance that a steel rolled beam bridge have capitalized costs less than $300 per square foot. Now, we are the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance, and we define short spans as simple spans 140 foot or less. This table reduces that full database of bridges to only bridges with lengths of 140 feet or less. It does not restrict it to simple spans, but only by the length. As we can see here, there is much more consistency in the average length and the average number of spans, which makes a better comparison than the full database results. And the results here, we see that steel rolled beam bridges has the lowest capitalized costs at $266.24 per square foot, with the precast spread box bridges at $272.64. However, at the bottom, there's still that statement that all are similar with none way out of balance. There's none that really are far away from the others, except maybe the plate girders are a little bit high, but that would be expected in these short spans since they are not as economical below about 80 feet. So now we're coming back to that original question that we get from owners. Which type of bridge is best for life cycle costs? Is it the precast box where the boxes are adjacent? Is it a steel plate girder? Precast boxes where the boxes are spread? Precast I-beam? Or steel rolled beam bridges? And this is where we come back to that statement that all are similar with none way out of balance. The overall weighted average capitalized cost for all 5 types of bridges is $252.40, showing up there towards the top. Each bridge type average is within 14% of that weighted average. Okay, now let's look at the dispersion. If we look at the standard deviation ranges within the 5 different types, they range between $48 and $65 per square foot. That doesn't help us, but if we turn that into a coefficient of variation, that coefficient of variation comes out to between 20 and 25%. And so all of the bridges are within 14%, and their coefficients of variation are significantly more than 14%. And what that means is that any one type of bridge may be most economical for a given bridge project. There is no one type of bridge that clearly beats the others. So the conclusions of the life cycle cost study are: typical concrete and steel bridges are competitive on initial costs, future costs, life cycle costs, and bridge life. Yeah, I know that's not what you expected since this is a steel bridge presentation, but I'm a bridge design engineer before I'm a steel bridge design engineer, and this is good news. For any given bridge project, concrete or steel bridge types may be the most economical. Again, that preconception that concrete is always less expensive is a misconception. And owners should consider both steel and concrete alternatives for individual bridge projects. And here in red, you see, I say there were no galvanized bridges in the database. And that question came up. It really came up because of the hurricanes in Puerto Rico and some of our bridge manufacturers helping Puerto Rico replace some of their bridges after that hurricane, because Puerto Rico was concerned about corrosion. And steel girder protection systems include painting, of course, that we're very familiar with, weathering steel, which is very common, metallizing, which is not as common, but is becoming more economical and more common, and of course, galvanizing. And galvanizing has become an economical and effective protection system. The initial costs are about equal to, or sometimes, depending on the region, even less than quality 3-coat paint systems. Galvanizing can significantly increase the life of a steel bridge. And of course, with galvanizing in the right conditions, there is near zero future maintenance. So another study was using the same bridge database was conducted to develop useful owner information on the effects of galvanizing on the historical life cycle costs for typical bridges. And this was sponsored by US Bridge, which was doing work down in Puerto Rico. So what we did was we took the painted steel bridges in the current database, that was not all of them, they had painted and weathering, and we modified them by assuming the steel had been galvanized instead of painted when it was built. Now we needed to make some assumptions, and the assumptions we made is that galvanizing adds 25 years to each bridge life. That galvanizing costs are the same as a quality paint system, therefore bridge initial costs do not change. That future painting costs are removed from the maintenance record when it's galvanized. Corrosion repairs to the girders are removed from the maintenance record. However, other types of maintenance like concrete deck and joint repairs and other maintenance work remain in the maintenance record. So of course, the first question comes up, where did the 25 years come from? And it comes from published data on time to first maintenance for galvanized products with ASTM application and requirements, and example bridges like this one shown here, where it's the Stearns Bayou Bridge that was built in 66. In 1997, they predicted 66 more years until the first maintenance, which means that expected life, and that's right over water and close to water, is well over 105 years. And so we did some studies on what that number should be, and we came up with 25 years for a galvanized bridge. So let's look at the effects it had. We're going to look at this painted steel bridge. It's bridge number 6520. It's in the county of Bradford. It was built in 1973. It has 3 spans, 220-foot length. Using painting steel I-beam bridge deterioration rate of 7.1%, we can predict the remaining life, which means from going from a condition rating of 6 down to a 3 is 42 years. And the bridge is the bridge is 41 years old, so that gives us an expected life for the painted bridge of 83 years. And with what we think is rational assumptions, we say, hey, if that bridge had been galvanized, that bridge would last 108 years. And then, of course, we lay out the life cycles for those bridges. On the left is the painted, where there is the initial cost. And in year 30 something, it looks like year 36, that bridge had to be repainted. And that came up with a present value cost for one cycle of the painted bridge of $140.05 per square foot. And the present value of that future maintenance came out to be $18.64. On the right is that galvanized bridge. We assume there is no repainting that's required, and that thing lasts 108 years, and that gives us a present value cost of $121.41. And of course, one lasts 83 and one lasts 108, so we needed to get those capitalized costs. So replacing with identical bridges, the perpetual present value cost, or the capitalized cost of the painted bridge, comes out to be $165.05. And for the galvanized bridge comes out to be $132.81. And we can see, because of the removal of the future maintenance and because of the expected extension of life, those capitalized costs go down significantly. And so here's just a table that shows us that. So this is for all the applicable steel bridges, rolled beam and plate girder, where we started with the painted bridges. There's 172 of them up there on the top left. And if we looked at the average of all those capitalized costs, it comes out to $264.82. If we did our assumptions on that and redid those with a 25-year extended life, it goes down to $242.31. Now, there were some weathering steel bridges in the database, and I did want to do a good comparison, I did do the study, so I guess I was correct there when I said I wanted to do this study. I wanted to compare weathering too, but I had a little issue. Now, weathering and galvanized are very close, but but there are not many weathering steel bridges in the database. Yeah, there were 26, but also some of those weathering steel bridges are more complicated. And so I did not feel comfortable to make a direct comparison between galvanized and weathering. But between galvanized and painting, we can see there's a significant decrease in capitalized costs. If we go over to the future costs, we can see future costs are cut in about half. And if we go over to the average life, of course, it should be 25 years more for the galvanized. So for the shorter length bridges, now we're only looking at 18 of them. These are the 140 foot. This is what the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance deals with. The painted come out to 277.34. The steel I-beam, when we galvanize it and add the 25 years, we see it drops down to 254.46. Again, the present value of the future costs are less than half, and the average life goes up by 25 years. But if we compare them also to the concrete bridges there, now we see compared to painted bridges, galvanized bridges have a lower capitalized cost than the best concrete option, which is the precast box spread. We also see that the future costs are reduced. And of course, the average life of galvanized bridges is more or less 25 years more. So, conclusions. Galvanized bridges have significantly lower capitalized costs and last 25 years longer compared to the painted steel bridges. And then here's an important statement, using rational assumptions. For all painted bridges, the galvanizing reduces capitalized costs 8.1% and 8.6% for rolled and plate girders, respectively. For painted bridges with that maximum length of 140 feet, those numbers come out to be 8.2% and 9%. And for all the painted steel bridges, galvanizes reduces the present value of future maintenance costs, which really is the repainting or the repair of corroded out girders, 50%. And then just one more, the reduced capitalized costs also result in steel bridges being more competitive compared to concrete alternatives. For those maximum length of 140-foot rolled beam bridges, the galvanized steel is less expensive than the best concrete by 6.5%, whereas painted bridges are actually more expensive than the best concrete by just under 2%. So let's summarize. Typical steel and concrete bridges are competitive on first cost. Typical steel and concrete bridges are competitive on life cycle costs. Looking at that galvanizing part with the rational assumptions that we applied, galvanizing is economical for first costs, extends the life of steel bridges, reduces future maintenance costs, and can lower agency life cycle costs. And the big conclusion that I want you to take away is that when we have that 60-foot span, owners should consider both steel and concrete alternatives for those individual bridge projects. And with that, I'll close with this slide. This is our standard closing slide for the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance. The title is 5 Ways to Keep Learning About Steel Bridges. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out Friday mornings. I think it's about 7 a.m. Mountain Time, where I am at the University of Wyoming. That gives you updates on what the Alliance is doing or what the industry interesting events are going on. You can find a supplier. These are where our members produce manufactured bridge solutions or prefabricated bridges. And if you have that 40-foot span, you can call them up. They'll deliver, stamp, and you can put that bridge in a weekend. We have eSpan 140, which is a simple design tool that'll give you a preliminary design on a short span steel bridge between 20 and 100 foot and 140 feet, so that you can lay that design that you got in just a couple minutes next to that concrete design and then let the market compete for your business. And of course, receive free project assistance and then schedule a workshop or a webinar. Now, this is a workshop or this is a webinar that we're doing today. But we also do them for like local transportation assistance programs or state DOTs. If you live in a region that you think a half day or a 6 hour or even an 8 hour workshop where we can cover a whole array of interesting items on how to design and construct short span steel bridges, there is no cost to the hosting organization. The Short Span Alliance will put the people together, bring them down there. We give the webinar. Sometimes it's combined with a tour of a fabrication shop or a galvanizing shop, and we've had such great feedback from that. So if you're interested in that, you contact that Dan Snyder that's down there at the kind of middle, right below the middle. Dan Snyder is our director for the Short Span Steel Bridge Alliance. He has been monitoring the Q&As here. We have the website that I really encourage you to go to and just see what that's to offer. I encourage you to use eSpan 140 to just see, hey, can this thing help us get started on a steel bridge? He also does Twitter and Facebook. Some of us don't. And with that, I thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day and stay safe. And we are willing to answer any questions you have.